programme today. It's a real pleasure to have Mark Tanzer here from ABTA. He's the CEO, and it's great to have him along to moderate this session. We've got four, I think, fascinating speakers. I'm going to try and make the technology work. I managed to screw it up last time, but I'll try and do better this time. So Mark, over to you. Thanks very much.
Can you hear me? Oh yes, that works. Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Mark Tanzer, as Harold said. Delighted to be here this morning to moderate this session. I think that climate change is an established fact now. How much of it is man-made and how much of it is beyond our control is really an academic argument. It's incumbent on all of us to do what we can to mitigate the impacts and the acceleration of climate change. It's a particularly potentially catastrophic scenario for tourism, which is a thirsty industry and one that consumes a lot of energy. And I think it's very important for us as a sector to demonstrate that we are taking whatever actions we can to reduce our energy and our water consumption, not least to have the license to continue to do all the good things that tourism does. Some of those solutions will be technological, some will be behavioural. And what I'd like and what I hope we'll discuss over the next hour is some of the suggestions and strategies that travel companies can follow in tackling this very large problem. So without further ado, I will move to our first speaker, Rachel Hawkins. If you would like to lead us off, that'd be great. Thank you. And we'll take questions. We'll hear all four presentations and then take Q&A at the end, if that's okay. Thanks.
I'm very impressed that Harold thinks he can fix the technology. Whenever I make that promise, it goes horribly wrong. So I'm feeling rather daunted at the moment. My name is Rebecca Hawkins. I'm the managing director of a small consulting company called the Responsible Hospitality Partnership. And over the last 20 years or so, we've specialised in delivering energy, water and waste savings primarily. I'd love to call it sustainability, but alas, it's not really sustainability. Energy, water and waste savings into businesses. And today I'm sort of going to try and ask, are we saving enough, specifically on the issues of energy and water? And perhaps the subtext of that is, are we saving what matters? Right, I'm told if I press this button it goes forwards. Oh, excellent. Only it went forwards too far. Right, I wanted to start off really in 1992. Does anybody know why I might want to start off in 1992? Rio, dead easy. Usually at my company points mean prizes, but I went to the sweetie cupboard this morning to get the prizes, and unfortunately my children have eaten them. So alas, you can just get a pat on the back. I wanted to start at Rio because, of course, it was in many ways the start of where we are now, the start of our journey. And Rio was important not just because it brought policymakers and NGOs into a room, and policymakers and NGOs had come into a room together to discuss the environment, community for decades. It was actually important because it also brought civil society and businesses into the room. And the key message that Rio purported was that we, as a collective, a society, could work together to try to resolve the range of issues that we were facing. And that we had two choices, really. We could either work together to resolve those issues and create a better world, a world in which there was better social justice, a better environment and equality. Or alternatively, we could, in the words of Christine Lagarde, fail to take action on climate change, in which case future generations could choose between being roasted, toasted, fried or grilled. So it was a pretty stark future that was drawn, one grim and one fab. And the really great thing about Rio was actually, despite the fact that one of those potential futures, sorry, I'm a bit taller than Harold, one of those potential futures was potentially terrible, it was actually a really positive meeting that said we could deliver a much, much better future. And do you know what? We can do it using the rules that we understand. We can do it using almost the normal rules of business. We can do it in a way that works for business. We can make a few tweaks to our business model, And we can deliver improved profitability. Now, if you've got businesses in a room, improved profitability is really important. I run a business. If anybody's offering me improved profitability, that's great. And what's more, for tourism, not only can we improve profitability through primarily energy waste and water saving, we can also preserve destinations. We can keep our customers really happy, and we can improve quality. What a great promise to make. And it was such a great promise that actually the traditional divisions that we've seen of goodies and baddies, whereby the NGO network, civil society are the goodies who are trying to drive positive change on environmental and social issues, and companies are the baddies who are destroying the environment. For a while, those divisions actually broke down, and we saw an amazing coming together, a coming together of NGOs, organisations like ITP, which had its origins within that Rio meeting, to deliver this positive future. And they all focused really, really significantly on that cost-saving message. And you know what? We've done some fantastic stuff. If you move on to the tourism industry and the accommodation and restaurant sector, which is the part of the tourism industry I know better, we've seen some really significant improvements. Most hotels can reduce their energy costs by between 2 and 5% if they're operating already at good practice levels. We've worked with hotels who have reduced their energy costs by up to 45%. That's essentially halving your energy bill. And bear in mind that your energy bill in a hotel is probably somewhere between 4 and 10% of your turnover. That's worth having. And actually, the water savings are even bigger, because most hotels haven't already focused so extensively on water, and they're even bigger. And actually, a lot of the stuff that delivers those savings is already on the market. Does anybody recognise any of the technologies on the board? I have cheated a bit by making some huge and some tiny. So, just a second. That's huge. And that's tiny, in reality. So I have cheated a bit, not to make it too easy. Do you recognise any of the technologies on the board? Everything on the left-hand side of the board is actually easily available, cheap, and can be bought out of an operational expenditure budget. Very commonly in use. I challenge you to go to any Marriott, IHG, any of the major brand-owned hotels and not see at least a low-flow shower head. If you're brave enough to unscrew the tap, you might see the little device on the left-hand side, which is an aerator. Really, really widely used. The stuff on the right delivers bigger savings. This one, I need a pointer. That one is a voltage optimization device. It's a bit taller than me. But Premier interviews that, and it can deliver 16% worth of energy savings. Has to be calculated within an individual property. It doesn't always deliver 16%, but it can. So the stuff on the right requires capital. The stuff on the left requires operational expenditure. And we've seen all of the major businesses start to deliver savings. So why am I standing here? Oh, okay. I'm standing here because the internet is not playing. But, and this is a huge but, we've now had 20 years or more since Rio, in which we've been trying to promote energy and water savings, and in which we've proven to the industry that it's worthwhile, and in fact many individual units within the industry have proven back that they can deliver savings. But if we look collectively across the accommodation sector alone, over the period of that 22 years, rather than going down, the total emissions of climate-related gases that we are emitting into the atmosphere has actually increased at a rate of about 3.2% per year. That means that by 2035, the total emissions from the accommodation sector, and this is Chizzy and Guam figures, and I personally think they're an underestimate because I think that they don't fully account for the growth in the micro industries, will have increased by 156%. in total. So far from reducing emissions, actually emissions from the sector are continuing to grow. And that's before you look at issues like waste, where a recent study like RAP demonstrated that for every 6 meals we produce, we might just as well throw one straight in the bin, because that's what we do. And all the resources in that meal just go straight in the bin. So 20 years worth of effort, lots and lots of brilliant stuff, some companies that have done outstanding things at micro level and at macro level, but we're not travelling in the right direction. So stuff clearly is not the solution. Actually, this isn't my granny. I went to look for a photo of my granny and I couldn't find one. But I think sometimes it's time to take a little introspection. So this is somebody else's granny. Now, if it was my granny, she would probably have said 3 things to me. Well, she might have said 4, but the 4th would have been that skirt's too short, go and get changed. So we'll scrub that one. But the 3 things that she would have said to me, if we'd have got to this juncture, we'd spent all this effort, quite a lot of money, trying to deliver change. We've done some good things, but we haven't got quite to where we want to. She would probably have made the following comments. And the first thing she would have said is, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And perhaps when we went to that Rio conference, we were a bit starry-eyed. Perhaps the story we sold was a bit too good to be true. I'm not saying that businesses can't increase their profitability through energy and water savings. We know they can. But perhaps it wasn't quite as easy as we made out to be. And perhaps we needed to change those classic business models just a little bit more than we thought we did. The second thing that she would have said to me is, if you keep doing the same things in the same ways, you'll get the same result. So if we go from here and we keep doing the same things in the same ways, the likelihood is 2035, 2050, we'll be in the same place. The third thing that she would have said is, it's easy to make money, but it's much harder to make a difference. And if we're really out there trying to deliver a difference in the long term, we perhaps need to think a little bit differently. So let's think a little bit differently. Perhaps our different thinking needs to be around the way we do business and the way we think about the implications of our businesses. And I think perhaps the first different thinking that we need to do is thinking about how we calculate the payback or the return on investment of the things that we put in place. Now, I said when I showed my list of favourite things that there were items that came from operational expenditure and items that came from capital expenditure budgets. I haven't, within my business, working with a range of hotels, we've probably worked with 60 or 70 hotels over the last 3 years, I haven't got a single item through an accountant off that capital expenditure list in 3 years. And I've been given some amazing models. I got given a model the other day, which is called a WACC model of accounting, W-A-C-C. Couldn't understand it for love nor money. We have got these hugely complex models for understanding payback, understanding return on investment, and they all have very short-term scales in them. So one of the big things that we really need to do is to stop thinking so short-term and to start thinking longer-term. And it's an unfortunate fact of life that if we are going to do that, we also have to think about our business models. Now, when I started working in the industry, I should point out I was probably about 12 or 13, because I'm not that old. Most of the large hotel companies owned and operated their hotel stock. Investing in stuff in your hotel was a logical thing to do because you either owned the infrastructure or you had a long management contract. Over the intervening years, something really important has happened. We've moved to a leasehold and a franchise model of operation, which means that for most large accommodation businesses, they don't own their physical infrastructure. Now, if you don't own your physical infrastructure, why would you invest in capital expenditure items that deliver a saving in 5 or 6 years when your lease might be up in 3? There is no net benefit to you. So that means you actually need to look at different people to deliver those savings. Those people are the people who construct or refurbish your hotels, the people who own your hotels, the people in your supply chain. and that there is a real need now, and an urgent need, to work with these individuals and these organisations to make sure that new hotel infrastructure, whether small or whether large, is actually energy and water efficient. There's also a real need to focus on the issue of waste, because waste doesn't just come in the form of energy and water wastage, it also comes in the form of the physical stuff that we bring into our businesses and that we throw away. There are resources embedded in them, and if we want those resources to go on being easily available into the future, we need to make sure that they are protected and preserved. How am I doing on time? I need to conclude. Okay, excellent. Okay, so there are some things that we need to do within the industry to actually make progress. We have done some fantastic things, but we have focused fundamentally upon the fact that stuff will deliver savings. Where if we really want to deliver savings, those savings will not come just from stuff, but they will come from the cultures, the corporate cultures, whether that's a small business or a large business, delivering those savings through thinking about things differently and focusing on what matters the most. I'm now getting towards the end of my career, hopefully, and I think that the future and the way of actually embedding these corporate cultures now lies with many of the people in this room who will be taking the agenda forward, who will be educating generations of the future, who will be developing those new business models. And I'm hopeful that they will drive the change that we've already started to deliver even longer term savings, both on the bottom line, but also on the stuff that matters. Thank you very much.
Anybody going to show me how to work this?
Oh, Harold's just disappeared.
Harold.
I guess if you minimise it up there.
It's not very posh.
Don't know whether he's put them all together.
As you can see, I'm definitely not taller than Harold. Fran Hughes. And which was it? Go up and down.
Doesn't even go yet.
Just while they're sorting out the technology, I may as well introduce myself. I'm Fran Hughes. I'm Head of Programmes at the International Tourism Partnership, and ITP is a member organisation. We're not for profit, and we're part of business in the community in the UK. And our members... Oh, brilliant, thank you. There we go. Our members are global hotel companies. So we've got 16 member companies. That represents most of the big brands that you will know of, and over 23,000 hotels worldwide. So we don't work on an individual property basis or with individual companies. We're all about collaboration. Where can we share best practice? Where can we learn from each other to drive the whole industry forward? And we're also behind the Green Hotelier website, at green_hotelier if you're on Twitter, please. Thank you very much. And I'm not actually going to talk about energy, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately or not, because I do think that we get energy savings. People know that they can do fairly quickly. They know that they can get quite substantial cost savings very quickly. And I think that the only barriers to saving, to actioning energy savings are really either ignorance of the subject matter completely, ignorance of the technologies which are going to help you most, in which case you need to talk to your engineers, you need to talk to consultants who know what works for your property, or the cost to put in the capital. But I think that the issue of water and arguing the business case for water saving is so much more interesting. And it's weird, really, because we can survive without electricity. We have done for thousands of years. We can't survive without water for 2 days, but we don't seem to get it in terms of arguing the business case. It's so much more vital. And we get reports saying that demand is going to outstrip supply by 2030 in about 40% of the world. So that's a third of the world's population will be subject to water stress in a mere 16 years' time. And, you know, we're dragging our heels, frankly. Going back to the point that Rebecca made about the ownership model. So the biggest hotel company in terms of rooms is IHG, Intercontinental Hotels Group, owns or runs over 4,000 properties worldwide. Do you know how many it owns? I know you would, but it's either 5 or 7. So, you know, I've heard different things recently, and this is just an illustrative pie chart just to show you, you know, the scale of the issue. So a hotel is built by one company, it's owned by another, and it's operated either by a third or fourth. You can count, you know, sort of 4 if you're talking about franchisees. So in terms of arguing the business case, it's, well, you've got a lot of people to persuade. You've got a lot of points where you need to argue the business case and really sort of think, where is your influence over any of these? So we heard last week that IHG had recently rolled out its Green Engage sustainability system across all of its portfolio, so it's made it, in effect, a brand standard. That is really big news. You can't believe how difficult it can be for brands to put those brand standards, which cover all sorts of health and safety, quality, right down to your napkins, to get that across the portfolio. That is big news. That is really affecting change across the industry. Now, we took on return on investment. That's the classic things, you know, where are you going to make your cost savings in terms of your energy or your water saving initiatives. And again, echoing really what Rebecca says, it's much more difficult with water. Water is generally underpriced throughout the world. It's very cheap. It still comes out of the tap. So why are you going to bother? And although there are a lot of quick things that people can do, a lot of water-saving technologies will take over that 2-year threshold, and people are not taking that sort of holistic view, the longer-term view on water management. And do you know the story of the classic test with a kid? So you give a kid a marshmallow, you say you can have that marshmallow now, or you can wait 10 minutes and have 2 marshmallows. Well, we're not going to wait 10, 15 minutes for the second marshmallow, because we're going to be out of there by that time. So the analogy is there that this short-term ownership is, you know, can be quite a bit of a barrier. So are you going to argue on the environmental side of things? Well, you can try, but once people hear the dreaded S word, sustainability, half the people are out of the room. It's not that people don't care about the environment or these things, it's just that they fail to see the connection to their business. Unless it's a very, very immediate situation, they're not going to recognise it, and they're just going to see that this is too worthy or doom-mongering. It doesn't really speak their language. Now, even somebody very senior in a very senior water organisation said, look, we've got to, as an industry, quit focusing on this is a good thing. You know, we've got to start putting water risk issues into the category of risk. We need to be a lot more savvy about this. What about in terms of future, if you're not going to be able to run your 2 swimming pools, your food prices are going up, you've got flood risk, water quality is affecting health and safety issues, endless issues, your reputation. What if you're seen as the greedy guzzler who's stealing all the locals' water? Investors are increasingly looking at water risk, and if you have not evaluated your water risk, you know, you're on a hiding to nowhere. Everybody has risks. You've got to be aware of them, and actually in the locality where you operate. So start using some of those tools that are out there. We've got here at the top, aqueducts from World Resources Institute will map any site, give you an assessment of the water risk in that area. Below that, Panda Water Risk from WWF, which shows also about your management approach. So, you know, get more savvy about looking at the water risk. Remember also, though, that water risk tools will only give you a certain picture. They don't necessarily always talk about the competing users, the socio-economic issues prevalent in the area where you're operating. And this is why we at ITP commissioned CWE to conduct a water risk assessment to some of the key development areas. So if we hadn't done this, we might not be quite so aware that, say, for example, there are significant pollution risks and flood risks in Beijing and Shanghai that water disposal in Dubai is a real problem. Shocking that a country with such wealth has such poor infrastructure. But a hotel, to be responsible to responsibly dispose of their water, might want to invest in water treatment plants before discharge, etc., etc. So taking an intelligent look at what's on the ground. You need to know what's in your locality, because Coca-Cola, for example, they can put a bottling plant anywhere. They're often championed as, sort of one of the great leaders in water management. You can't just always put a hotel somewhere else. Hotels are very much dependent on the locality, so that's even more of a reason to look at your specific risks in that area and put it into context, not just with blanket reductions. Interesting graph here from Suzanne Beck and her research at Griffith University, just showing how much tourism consumes over local municipal water use. So in most countries it's vastly, vastly exceeded, apart from in France, Spain and the UK, where it looks like tourists are a bit smelly and clearly don't use as much water as we do here. So some great research there on water. And we've done our own research as well. We reached out to stakeholders earlier in the year to see what issues they felt were most relevant to the industry. Water came third after health and safety and labour standards. And this is what our stakeholders told us. When delving into that, say, what is the problem with the industry? Again, Suzanne Becken's work saying 40% of hotels are not even measuring their water use. You cannot have any kind of concept of what you're doing unless you start to measure your water use, see where it's being used so that you can target where to reduce that and see really what good looks like. And get those basics right. Get some of the technologies there that Rebecca highlighted on. Like, so many hotels are not doing the simple things like maintenance and applying the right technology. Water in the supply chain is a big thing. The Accor Planet 21 study highlighted that 86% of their water footprint was in their food and beverage supply. Now, if you're not getting the basics right, you might not want to start looking down the supply chain just yet, but be aware of that. And as I say, take a local approach and look at the risk. Put this in the risk camp, in your business continuity, in your ability and license to operate, not in the sustainability camp. So just to highlight a few best practice and resources, if you want to read more about companies, I've not stood up here to trot out the best cases from our members, but you can read, if you want to really know, CDP responses are the best. I think sustainability reports naturally are Green Hotelier site and a host of other resources to help you on the way to water stewardship and energy management. Thank you very much.
Is this the mover on
If it doesn't work, just click
on the screen, or?
just stay up.
Okay, lovely. Okay, thanks very much, Fran, and thanks all for coming to this session. So my name is Rachel McCaffrey, and I'm Head of Sustainable Tourism for the Intersave Caribsave Group. And I'm approaching this subject in the context of climate change, so my presentation is going to focus in on that. Just tell you a little bit about the Intersave Caribsave Group. We're a not-for-profit NGO established in 2007. We have offices in the UK, the Caribbean, Africa, China and Malaysia. Projects in about 40 different countries, varying from community-run marine reserves in the Caribbean to solar energy grids in Kenya and Bangladesh. The SAVE element of the name actually stands for International Sectoral Approach to Vulnerability and Resilience, and we focus on working intersectorally, which in tourism is obviously particularly important because it has interdependencies with so many different sectors like agriculture, transport, utility management, insurance. And we specialise in climate change solutions and international development based around these 6 key themes that you can see here. So climate change impacts and adaptation, governance and legislation, education and youth, South
South-South cooperation, which is really technology share between China and the developing world, green growth and livelihoods. So, hold on, I'll go back a slide actually. So that's me. I just wanted to find out a little bit more about you, if that's okay. Would you mind putting your hand up if you're in the audience and you either own or manage a hotel? Anybody here? Okay, a few people. Is there anyone here who owns or manages a hotel who hasn't already implemented some form of energy or water saving? Okay. Is there anyone here who's ever stayed in a hotel? Yeah? Most people? Great. Okay. And anyone here who's stayed in a hotel and has come across energy or water inefficient practices and made a complaint to the management or the front desk? Few people, reasonable number, good. You know, I'm glad to see that. But I hope to have to increase that number by the end, to have convinced more of you that this is really a vital issue, and not just for individual hotels, but for the tourism sector as a whole. So the reality of climate change is that we're now right up here. I don't know how well you can see that, but you know, I think this graph probably won't be new to many of you. Climate change, atmospheric carbon dioxide is now at almost 400 parts per million concentrations in the atmosphere. And scientific consensus is that this is bad, really, really bad. You're an educated audience. I'm not going to go over all the scary statistics for you now. But I will just focus in on, or just kind of flag up the synthesis report, which I don't know if you heard about, came out from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just Sunday, actually just a couple of days ago. And this report, the latest in a long line of reports, highlighting the urgent need for action to avoid catastrophic damage from climate change. And it's interesting, this report, it doesn't just say that we have to cut down fossil fuel use by a certain amount. It says that, but it is actually saying now we've got to eliminate it. In the next 80 years, we've got to get rid of it completely. Now, at this stage in 2014, it's hard to imagine how that would look, but one thing we all know, it's a challenge. And we know that climate change is happening. It's all around us. Glaciers are melting, forests burning, the seas becoming more acidic, changing ocean currents are changing weather patterns, making seasons much more unpredictable, and increasing extreme events like massive tropical storms, heat waves, freak cold snaps, flooding. And of course, tourism is an industry that's highly dependent on the environment. And the impacts of climate change are felt not just in remote African deserts and low-lying tropical islands, but also in urban areas. And the associated costs of solving the problems connected with it are considerable. And there's nobody putting their hands up and volunteering to pay. Now, the fifth assessment report, which is known as IR5, produced by the IPCC, details the global implications of climate change. This summary for policymakers, prepared by the IPC Working Group 1, is one of a series, and it synthesised the most pertinent findings of AR5 for specific business sectors. And this is the one for tourism. I have a download of it here. It's been compiled using evidence from scientists working around the world. You can have a look at the website if you want to examine the evidence in more detail. It's been widely peer-reviewed, including by Intersave, and then translated or simplified for the industry. It's presented very simply and clearly, and shows that actually almost all areas of the tourism industry are likely to be impacted. So in winter sports, we know there's likely to be less and more unpredictable snowfall, which will shorten seasons, increase the cost of artificial snowmaking costs, and jeopardise vulnerable low-lying resorts. Sea levels are likely to be half to two-thirds of a metre higher than currently, so that's going to be a really big issue for coastal tourism and for many coastal cities around the world. There are opportunities for adaptation highlighted too. Things like extending the season for camping in wilderness areas and forests, and the expansion of Arctic cruising, for example. But if you work in tourism and you're not already familiar with the contents of this report, and to be honest, I don't think enough people in tourism are aware of it and have read it, then I would urge you to download it, have a look at it, and put it in front of the people you know that matter. There are very nice diagrams in this report, very nice infographics, but sometimes you need to see the reality of what these changes really mean to get the picture. These images are all from islands in the Caribbean, and you can see some of these beaches, they're fairly slim anyway, and some of these are on in very exclusive, expensive areas to stay in. I think one of them, the middle one there, I think is on the west coast of Barbados, which is one of the most expensive areas of most expensive places to stay in the Caribbean. This is what happens when rising sea levels combine with the destruction of the coral reef, which previously would have absorbed up to 90% of wave energy. And obviously it isn't just hotels and beach bars on the coast. Poor people live there too. These coastal communities, previously dependent on fishing, some of the poorest in the Caribbean and most other places in the world. And they're highly vulnerable to the worst of impacts of sea level rise, like storm surge and hurricanes, losing houses, businesses, livelihoods and amenities. And this then has implications for employment, for crime, associated unrest in these destinations, as well as increasing the devastation caused by extreme weather events. Climate change will affect water supplies, crops, livestock, ultimately affecting food security. And for already very poor people, the only solution actually is to move. NATO have identified climate change as what they call a threat multiplier that increases the chances of conflict and will result in large-scale migration. Just how many climate refugees will be banging on the doors of Australia, Europe and the US is very difficult to estimate, and the numbers get kind of caught up in some quite ugly politics. But I think we can be fairly sure it's going to increase, and it's going to increase significantly. And the stark implications for tourism are illustrated in this picture, which was taken in southern Spain and was in the press quite recently. It's quite uncomfortable to look at whether you work in tourism or not. And talking about uncomfortable, let's very quickly just zoom in on one of those migrants desperately trying to escape to a better life. You know, you look at this man's face as he clings on to the fence, overlooking these golfers, enjoying all the privileges of the luxury resort, all the amenities there. He's utterly powerless. You know, you can start to understand why if someone's offering a gun, an ideology that might offer him a bit more power, he might be tempted to fight. And Egypt, Kenya, Syria, even parts of Turkey, this political risk map here shows that more and more formally stable tourist destinations are increasingly risky to operate in and travel to. So, the business case for saving energy, and of course water, goes far wider than just individual hotels. And I hope I've just, emphasised how vitally important it is. As energy costs go up due to political instability, exhaustion of fossil fuels, carbon taxes perhaps, and prices for water increase as it becomes more scarce, of course it will make financial and environmental sense to reduce consumption. So I hope next time you stay at a hotel where there are a zillion individually controlled lights in your room, you arrive and the TV's blaring and the air conditioning's been running for hours and there's a completely dysfunctional towel reuse system, I hope you'll make your feelings known at the front desk. Because I've worked in the private sector before and I know that customer feedback matters. So I'd urge you to share your feelings. That's me. Thank you very much.
Which one is yours, Chris?
Okay.
Which one is yours? This one.
Yes, that's it. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, a bit late there. My name's Christopher Warren. I'm chair of a company called Hamlet Research, which is dedicated to looking at encouraging pro-environmental behaviour change. What I'm focusing on today is behaviour change. There are really three areas of pro-environmental management of hotels and tourism, which is design and technology, management practices, and behaviour change. And that's something that we haven't talked so much today about, which I hope I'll be able to contribute. But what would be really helpful for me is if you could all just give me help right now for this presentation. If you could put your hands up to say that you enjoy taking a shower. A few people, you enjoy, great. Do you enjoy keep them up? Do you enjoy taking short showers? And do you take showers under 5 minutes? Do you time your showers? No. Let's be honest, none of us really know how much we're consuming. Our utilities are fed to our homes in an invisible manner. Unlike the Romans, who are very sort of vocal about their toilet processes and so on, we actually don't know what each one of us is using. And we actually don't know how to measure how much we're using. Most small tourism businesses don't really understand how to read their utility bills, and as been discussed already, many hotels don't measure it. So if you come to my hotel and I ask you to use less of what? So for instance, there's a very good eco-lodge in Chile that encourages its guests to use 40 litres of water for their showering per day. 98% of their customers come from North America or Europe, and of course they find this very exciting and a bit of a challenge. But there is the fact that some people will be using more water in those showers. For example, at Boundary National Park in Australia, the showers at the national park have a push button and they stop at 5 minutes. That means that an awful lot of rural Australians that have the showers actually have longer showers. The point I'm making is that averages, or average mean, is a very dangerous responsible tourism figure because it doesn't actually encourage people to change behaviour. Okay. So why am I doing this? Well, we've already talked about climate change and so forth, but I just thought I'd beat the gong on wildfires for a minute because that affects California, it affects Mediterranean and Australia. So right now, if a fire happens in one of those destinations, me as a tourist can adapt and go to a different location. But those destinations suffer the economic loss, and it can be sustained and cause initial economic ruin to those communities, and particularly in those areas. So, for example, if we look at the Blue Mountains fire that was happening right this time last year, there were 3 locations that were some distance from the tourist attractions, but no tourists went. They actually lost $2 million a day, which was their entire tourism income. And it took them until April to get any positive return. So we're dealing with very serious problems, and obviously those destinations can become less attractive for those people to visit. Meanwhile, as you'll see at the bottom of the graph, we still consume more and more. Even though we've all put in the light bulbs, etc., we've also all got mobile phones, new TVs, etc., which is why in the United Kingdom, electrical consumption of that area has grown 171%. So we aren't progressing, as Rebecca pointed out earlier. Now, we have used very large figures to audit our destinations. This is an example of a small tourist destination in Australia, and it gives us some very interesting numbers. Interesting, analytical maybe, but certainly doesn't motivate anyone to act. They're huge numbers, quite frightening, and can make people feel sad. If you feel sad and you're frightened, you don't take any action. So these sorts of way of presenting climate change in tourism does not help behaviour change. Obviously, auditing your business can help, and here's an example of those businesses that contributed to that audit figure. And you can see there that most of those numbers, or most of their carbon footprint, is generated by electricity. And so from 2008 to 2010, we did 2 audits, and here's some examples of companies, and sure enough, they've all made very easy reductions. They've changed their light bulbs, they've changed a couple of white goods, but we haven't actually seen any behaviour change other than those practices. But certainly, they've made substantial savings. So now let's take a look at one business, which I know well because I'm a partner in it, and let's look at what happens over 7 years. So over a 7-year period of trying to do the right thing, initially there's substantial savings. In fact, overall there is 45% savings, very much as you mentioned earlier, Rebecca, which is terrific. But if you also look at it, it sort of plateaus. If you're wondering what happened in 2010-11, that's when the owners left for a 6-week holiday and the replacement managers weren't so mindful. But overall, things aren't progressing. So in effect, what we're doing is we're getting to a green ceiling where technology can't help us any further. And that leads us to a further problem, because the argument so far to date has been the one about money, and that if you take these actions, you'll save money. The figures you're looking at now are if you look at the blue line, that's the guest bookings, kilowatt hours per guest booking. Now, over that period of time, the guest bookings grew by 8%, which means that the electricity consumption was reduced by 48%. But equally, in Australia, the price of electricity grew. So in effect, there was no financial gain. Now, remembering an earlier comment I made was most small tourism businesses, and a lot of large businesses, don't read their utility bills, don't measure and monitor. What you're actually seeing is no gain. So we're still not seeing any behaviour change. And in fact, if I showed you, I don't have time today, but the gas, the water, the firewood consumption, there was no change. So in other words, people are still running along as normal. So where can we focus our effort? And obviously I want to try and make this presentation as practical for those who are in hotels and so on as possible. This is just an example of a couple who stayed in one of the cottages in that case study property over 4 nights. And you can see that there's a base level of electricity consumption of 24%. But they actually affect 76% of electricity consumption. They also affect 99% of the water and the gas. Only 1% or less than 1% is actually used for cleaning purposes. So there's a huge opportunity of controlling consumption at the point of peak usage. And that everybody should be looking at monitoring their guests on this level. So if I just give you an example of why we shouldn't be using averages, if you look at this table and look at the extreme left and the extreme right for the moment, you can see that on the left-hand side, the prudent couple who stayed on the 28th and 29th of September 2014 in the same cottage as everybody else did, they used 3 kilowatt hours per night, 357 litres of gas, 321 litres of water, and they went to a maximum temperature of 22.6 degrees. The couple who stayed in the same cottage 2 weeks later on the 9th and 10th of October with the same climatic outdoor conditions used 3 times as much electricity, twice as much water, twice as much gas, and got to a staggering 31 degrees temperature inside in spring and in Australia. So the point is that if we take an average, which is the middle figure you'll see there, which is over 1 month in the same cottage, you'll see that if I then asked you all to please achieve a great green action and go for that reduction on, this is the average figure, an awful lot of you will be actually using more, as well as some of you trying to use less. And this is the danger of using average figures, because we aren't able to motivate people precisely at the time of consumption, which is the critical factor. So I just want to say that if we want people to change, we've got to measure, and then we've got to persuade them at the time of consumption. All right, now I've got this presentation on our website with a short paper providing a commentary of these figures, so you don't have to write any of this down. And obviously I'll be more than happy to help anybody on this subject afterwards if they want some advice on how we can perhaps do this. I'm hoping that we can achieve a 30% reduction from just behaviour change, because the key thing is don't make consumption secret. Once everybody knows how much everybody is using, you use social identity, right, to control behaviour. Just as why I'm not standing here in an Australian outfit with my surfboard, because that wouldn't be socially acceptable on this occasion. I could think of other examples, but you get the drift. The point is we have to start to try and conform to what is a prudent process, and I believe that people are prepared to do that. Thank you very much for your time.